For 10 years, the walls of Troy held. They had resisted the greatest warriors of the Greek world. Kings, heroes, demigods, all stalled before stone ramparts that refused to break. And then, suddenly, the enemy was gone. No battle, no surrender. Just silence and a gift. A massive wooden horse stood outside the gates. According to legend, it was the final move of the Trojan War, a trick so brilliant it ended an empire in a single night. But here's the uncomfortable truth. There is no evidence that such a horse ever existed. So why is this story one of the most famous military deceptions in history? And what really happened when Troy fell? To answer that, we have to separate myth from memory and understand how stories are born from catastrophe. The traditional tale is clean and cinematic. After a decade-long stalemate, the Greeks pretended to abandon the war. They left behind a colossal wooden horse, supposedly an offering to Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. One Greek agent, Sinon, stayed behind. He spun a convincing lie. The horse was built so large that the Trojans could never drag it inside their city. If they tried, Athena would punish them. If they left it outside, she would favor Troy. Warnings came quickly. The priest Laocoon famously declared, "I fear the Greeks, even when they bear gifts." Cassandra foresaw disaster. No one listened. The horse was pulled through the gates. That night, Greek soldiers hidden inside emerged, opened the city, and Troy burned. It is a perfect story. Too perfect. Here's the first problem. Homer, the poet most associated with the Trojan War, doesn't describe the horse in detail in the Iliad. In fact, the Iliad ends before Troy falls. The horse appears only briefly in the Odyssey, mentioned as a past event. The first full dramatic version of the Trojan horse comes centuries later, from Virgil's Aeneid, written in Rome under Emperor Augustus. By then, the story had passed through generations of oral retelling, political reshaping, and poetic embellishment. Earlier epics that may have contained the episode are lost. What survives is already a polished legend. That doesn't mean Troy wasn't real. It means the ending may not be. Troy was not a fantasy. Archaeological excavations at Hisarlik in modern Turkey reveal a heavily fortified Bronze Age city. Rebuilt many times, destroyed many times. One layer shows clear evidence of fire, collapse, and violent destruction. Weapons, burned structures, chaos. A city fell here. But archaeology gives us no sign of a massive wooden construct, no hollow structure, no physical trace of the most famous object in the story. So historians asked a different question. If Troy fell violently, how was that remembered as a horse? In Bronze Age warfare, siege engines were rare but devastating. Battering rams were often covered in animal hides, including horse hides, soaked in water to prevent defenders from setting them on fire. Some were decorated with animal imagery or given symbolic names. Over time, a massive siege device, especially one associated with a breakthrough, could easily become remembered as the horse. A literal object becomes a metaphor becomes a legend, and a legend becomes a story that survives for 3,000 years. This theory is stranger and possibly more convincing. In Greek mythology, Poseidon was the god of both horses and earthquakes. One of Troy's major destruction layers appears to have been heavily damaged by seismic activity. Walls cracked, foundations collapsed. An earthquake could have opened the city to attack, a sudden breach that defenders couldn't stop. In mythic memory, Troy didn't fall to men alone. It fell to the god's horse. Whatever actually happened, the fall of Troy was traumatic. Cities don't remember chaos clearly. They remember meaning. A sudden collapse, betrayal, or unexpected breach becomes easier to understand when shaped into narrative. And no narrative is more powerful than this. The strongest walls are useless if the danger comes from inside. that idea was too good to forget. By the time Roman poets told the story, the horse wasn't just a tactic, it was a warning. Trust can destroy you. Victory doesn't always come by force, and cleverness can defeat strength. That symbolism outlived Troy itself. Today, we still use the term Trojan Horse, not for siege engines or earthquakes, but for hidden threats disguised as gifts. And that may be the greatest proof of all, even if the horse never stood outside Troy's gates. It has been walking through ours ever since. By the time Troy was dust and memory, the war that destroyed it had already begun to change. Real conflicts don't survive the centuries intact. They fracture, they merge with other wars. They absorb the values of the people retelling them. And slowly, fact gives way to meaning. The Trojan horse didn't need to be real to become true. Most historians no longer think of the Trojan War as a single 10-year campaign led by famous heroes. Instead, it appears to be a compressed memory of multiple conflicts between Mycenaean Greeks and Anatolian powers spread across generations. Trade routes, political influence, control of the Dardanelles. Troy sat at the crossroads of all three. Over centuries of storytelling, separate battles fused into one epic struggle. Multiple destructions became a single catastrophic night, and a messy, violent collapse became a single, unforgettable act of deception. The horse was the final edit. When Virgil wrote the Aeneid, he wasn't just telling a story, he was building an identity. Rome traced its origins to Aeneas, a Trojan survivor who escaped the burning city and eventually gave rise to Roman civilization. That meant Troy had to fall not because it was weak, but because it was outwitted. The horse served that purpose perfectly. Troy wasn't defeated by brute force. It was undone by fate, deception, and divine manipulation. That framing allowed Rome to inherit Troy's dignity while claiming moral and historical supremacy over Greece. The myth didn't just survive, it became politically useful. Once the horse entered the cultural bloodstream, it was unstoppable. Later, writers debated how many warriors hid inside. Some listed names. Others exaggerated its size until it scraped the sky. Artists carved it into marble. Painters placed it at the center of burning cities. None of this required proof. The image was stronger than reality. And archaeology, quiet, broken, and incomplete, could never compete with a towering wooden beast full of heroes. Strip away the poetry, and a simpler picture remains. A fortified city fell suddenly. The attackers exploited an opening, whether political, structural, or natural. The defenders were unprepared. Fire consumed the city. That's it. No divine warnings, no hidden soldiers climbing down ladders. Just chaos, fear, and the end of a world. But that version doesn't teach a lesson. The Trojan horse survives because it explains something timeless. Power doesn't always fall from outside pressure. It collapses when trust is misplaced, when vigilance fades, when victory feels guaranteed. That's why the metaphor migrated so easily into the modern world. In cybersecurity, a Trojan isn't forced into a system. It's invited, installed willingly, trusted by its victim. And once inside, it does the damage no external attack could. The ancient story became a modern warning. So was the Trojan horse real? Almost certainly not. But Troy was real. Its destruction was real. And the fear that something unseen can end even the strongest defenses, that is very real. The horse isn't history. It's memory shaped into meaning. And sometimes that's the version that lasts. Troy fell nearly 3,000 years ago. Yet the image of its fall, a silent gift waiting patiently outside the walls, has never stopped walking through history. Not because it happened, but because it could.